G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle. Today is the first episode in Breaking an Edition, the 5th edition Dreadnoughts. This is a new retrospective series, similar in vein to the What Broke the Fan series, where rather than looking at a faction as a whole over many editions, the series will look at the particular books which seriously damaged, if not outright broke, their edition of the game. This first episode looks at the 5th edition Dreadnoughts, as I said earlier, but for some perspective, some of the other books you can sort of expect to include in this will be things like the 6th edition Eldar and Tau, possibly combined together, considering what Tau list did to the meta, 5th edition Necrons, 6th edition Space Marines, and more. So with that in mind, what the hell happened with the Dreadnoughts in 5th edition that warrants them having an episode all to themselves? I have two words for you. Matt Ward. Okay, let's take a step back and talk about 5th, and spend a moment to understand it before we talk about the Spiritual Liege. 3rd edition was seen as a very basic game, compared to 2nd edition 40k. It lost much of the personality of 2nd edition, all that flavour, the seasoning, and streamlined the system massively, far more than something like 8th did. Starting with 3.5, which was the Chaos Space Marine Codex, a book which people often cite as broken, but which compared with 4th edition as a whole was actually rather balanced, we were introduced to things like universal special rules, and the ability to customize your force was returned. This edition was probably the most fun with regards to building your force. However, balance was an issue and it was able to be abused as there were simply too many variables to balance with so much going on in these books. 5th edition consequently saw a scaling back of this unique flavour. Instead, it tried to return the codexes back to sort of their 3rd edition state, but with the aforementioned USRs, or Universal Special Rules, of 4th edition remaining in place. Now, early casualties of this edition included the Chaos Space Marines and Tyranids, and even the Orcs, whilst the forces which hadn't been updated, such as the Eldar, Dark Eldar, Tau, Necrons, would all languish right until the very end of the edition, when at least the Dark Eldar and the Necrons were given a bone. One might say too big of a bone. There was a huge change in approach from streamlined one-size-fits-all armies in this edition to what could be called massively overpowered forces, where almost any choice you made when building your force would yield a viable army. Space Wolves, Blood Angels, Imperial Guard, Dark Eldar, Necrons, and of course the Dreadnoughts all fell into this new building pattern. We start to see a force emerge, a pattern with single, massive, new units being introduced, which would be a must-have and made it into nearly every list. This would include Thunderwolf Cavalry, Storm Ravens, Venoms, Doomsides, and of course the Dreadnought. So I've harped on a little bit now about how they changed the game and how trends started to appear. But what made the Dreadnoughts in particular so insufferable? Firstly, there's the writing. I will give this pride of place as it was really bad. The problem they suffered from was it was Matt Ward's style, basically. Imagine that guy at your local gaming club, the guy who always raves about his army and how it's the best, how cool they are, how every time you play he manages to worm into the conversation, how his guys do everything better, how other people wish their army was like his. Now imagine the insufferable prick is also writing the official books for said force. Yeah, that's 5th edition era Matt Ward. It has been said that his work lacks restraint. And for 40k, that's quite an accomplishment. His style actually was so overbearing that actually made the books he wrote less fun to play against, or to play with. Because if you played with it, you felt dirty. You felt as if playing 5th edition Ultramarines and their Spiritual Liege just, ugh. You can try and ignore his work, but like a bad smell, it just won't go away. He introduced to the tabletop a character by the name of actually, I'll save it for later. Due to his particular style infiltrating all aspects of the book's creation, he would often write powerful factions wherein all the units were viable, a strong internally balanced book, yes, but the problem with that was that his forces lacked identity. There were no tactics which spoke to a particular playstyle. just take whatever you like, it's all viable, everything was a jack of all trades in his books. For many, that just fundamentally hurts. All Grey Knight armies just felt the same due to his writing talents. Sure, one might be loaded with Purifiers, another with Paladins, but it was still an army of supermen amongst supermen. I'll try and give some examples here as to what made them so strong, and go over a few of the units I really have horrible memories of. First of all, Purifiers. They're an elite option which could be turned into troops, thus making the core element of your force. They were cheap, fearless, armed with multiple special weapons, usually the Psybolt ammunition Psycannon. For those who don't remember the edition, imagine 4 Strength 7 assault cannons on a unit which could ride in a Las Razorback. They cost about the same as the average Trader Marine special unit, such as a squad of 10,000 Suns or a squad of Khorne Berserkers, who are armed with bolt guns or maybe bolt pistols and a couple of special weapons like plasma pistols. Oh, and they also had an ability which hit every single enemy unit in close combat on a 4+, which is absolutely swell if you play Orcs or Tyranids and half your boys or Horngaunts die before they even strike. Then there was Death Cult Assassins, able to be taken in units as an inquisitorial henchman, thanks to Codiez, and for his low cost of 100 points. Oh, what a penalty you pay for that. These assassins were armed with 4 power weapon attacks each, and that's on the charge, by the way, 3 base. But this is the same edition in which Khorne Berserkers had that many attacks. Unlike the Khorne Berserkers though, because they were power weapons, and in those days power weapons ignored all armor saves, nobody got a save against Death Cult Assassins. Only people with invulnerables. And, unlike in a Khorne Berserker army, all these Death Cult Assassins, they had 5+ invulnerables. Oh, and they usually hung out with Tech Marines, which meant they got both Psychotrope grenades and Rad grenades, universally dropping the stats of the units that they charged. Because of course they did. Just ask me how I know, and just ask Kat about how you play them. I'll save you the question, you put them all in Land Raiders, which the Tech Marines then heal as you go. Then we have Automallius Inquisitors, and whilst not as broken as the rest of the book, these pricks could take not only 1 demon weapon, but 2 of them. They were infinitely better than the ones that the Chaos Space Marines and Demons had access to. They didn't eat the user, and they usually had fantastic abilities. They didn't just give you, +4 attacks, they gave you things like +1 strength, +1 toughness, +1 attack, +1 initiative, all at the same time. That is one of those infuriating things. You know, when another codex gets equipment that belongs to some other faction and uses it better. Then we have another fun one, Grandmaster Mordrack. This guy was a Grey Knight who teleports with his retinue of Terminators, who by the way are ghosts. Also, if he's hurt, he can summon more ghosts. Doesn't sound too bad having a unit of effectively Initiative 6 Terminators thanks to their halberds, with a guy wielding a Thunderhammer, all of them, by the way, being Nemesis Force weapons, so if you take a wound, you make a leadership check, and if you fail, you just, die. Oh, by the way, they also had Hammer Hand, so Strength 5 base, so Strength 10 Thunderhammer, and Strength 5 on all those power weapons, the Initiative 6 across the squad, and oh yeah. That's pretty bad. Oh, what's that? They also had a No Scatter Deep Strike in turn 1. Huh. Balanced. Then you've got Grey Knight Librarians. Better than Ahriman, because of course they are, with 9 powers, which are passed if you roll 2d6 and roll under your leadership. And the only way to mess it up is to roll a double 6. Unlike today, powers back then were very reliable. Most were weak until this particular codex, where your powers included things like Might of the Titan, which added +1 strength to the entire unit, the Librarian and everyone he joined. It also allowed you to roll an extra dice for armor penetration rolls. This also stacked with Hammer Hand. So that basic Grey Knight squad, the cheapest of the cheap basic Grey Knights with halberds, yeah, they strike at strength 6 with 2d6 armor penetration. Why take anti-tank weapons when you can just turn your basic squads into melter bombs with their fists? Another fun and balanced power was Warp Rift. It's like a flamer. You cast it, and then anyone touched by it takes an initiative check. What's that? You failed? Cool, your unit's removed from play. What's that? You're Kugarth. the Great Unclean One special character of Nurgle. Cool, don't roll higher than a 2 on 1d6. Oops, sorry, that's a 3. Take your 250 points off the table. Oh, but what if Kuyath survive that? Well, thanks to Dark Excommunication, you just lose all of your demonic gifts for the turn. No big deal. I mean, guys, I get it. They fight demons, but this is just ludicrous. There was almost no counterplay to this. You didn't get dispels in 5th edition. Only Space Marine Librarians with a Psychic Hood or Space Wolf Rune Priest had any hope of stopping these powers. And even then... Alright, what about basic Dreadnoughts? Well, back in this age, with no hull points in the game, Dreadnoughts could be pretty tough customers. But, you know what's really tough? Having 2 autocannons with Cybolt ammunition, so that any of your 4 ballistic skill 5 shots on each Dreadnought can be rerolled if they didn't hit. And they hit as hard as crack missiles, since they're strength 8. Bonus points awarded to people who took 3 Dreads and 3 Venerable Dreads in their elite slot for about 800 points, and put out 24 super autocannon shots per turn. Instant death to toughness 4, don't forget. Nemesis Dreadnoughts. You knew they'd be on the list. Clearly, a Terminator in a mech suit. Yet, somehow, a monstrous creature, and therefore infinitely harder to kill than a vehicle. Because it was as tough as a Hive Tyrant, but it had the armour of a Terminator. 130 points stock, which, by the way, is cheaper than a Greater Demon. And although some people might complain that's not a fair comparison, they don't come with any ranged war gear. I'll take the time right now to remind you that most demons don't have guns either. And on top of that, for 75 points, they don't have the ability to literally teleport across the table. But the Nemesis Dreadknight did. Now, there were some strong counters to it in this edition, but since they came in the form of the other hyper-overpowered codexes of 5th edition, like Dark Eldar and Necrons, I'm not really sure it counts. Ah, Paladins. Let's face it, you knew these would make the list. And it's not just because they were Terminators, which were each the equivalent of a Space Marine HQ, armed with some of the best melee weapons in the game, improving invols unit-wide, striking with some at Initiative 6, or using that one guy with the warding staff to just tank things with his 2+ invulnerable save in close combat. It wasn't the fact they had Psy Cannons on 4 of the guys, it was the fact that if you spread the war gear out so that each guy had slightly different stuff, you could play hot potato with the wounds, allocating one to this guy with the 2 falchions and the Psy Cannon, or one to this guy with the Psy Cannon and the halberd, or what about one on that guy with the Psy Cannon and the sword, and don't forget Larry over there with the Master Crafted Psy Cannon and sword. They're all differently armed, so they spread the wounds, like you spread your wallet at a Games Workshop store. Bonus small dick points for upgrading one of them to an apothecary, granting this 20 wound unit feel no pain, naturally on a 4+ in this edition, so effectively a 30 wound unit. Oh, joy of joys when you came across this unit sat across the table and joined by the aforementioned Librarian and Kaldor fucking Drago. Okay, so this is where Matt Wartism struck hardest. His rules, oh boy, his rules. 2+ armor save, 3+ invulnerable, 4 wounds, Eternal Warrior, so immune to instant death. When he fights a Psyker, and that's any Psyker, he became strength 10, and he could cast on his unit Hammerhand. So Hammerhand from Drago, Might of the Titan from Librarian, and Watch. Also, this is a fun time to mention that all Grey Knights have preferred enemy versus demons, so enjoy playing against this army when they reroll all 1s to hit and to wound in both the shooting and assault phase, and they're all armed almost exclusively with war gear that hits on 2s and 3s and wounds on 2s. Oh, and did I mention the fluff? Why, Drago's background is a masterclass in Mary Sue, the kind of overwritten fan creation which would make even Belisarius' I make anything happen call blush. A list of achievements longer than a Primarch, such as single-handedly holding off a demon horde for 2 days, killing one of the strongest bloodthirsters with no weapons, and then taking his demonic axe and psychically reforging it into a new sword for himself. He also set fire to Nurgle's garden, killed a demon prince on day 1 on the job. He killed the most prized demonettes of Slaanesh, who were all so alluring that just to see them would drive any mortal, superpowered or not, insane. He smashed apart a Tzeentch city after somehow navigating it. And, of course, he carved his former master's name into Mortarian's heart. Now, this last one was explained away by saying that he spoke Mortarian's true name, rendering him powerless. But it still just reeks of terrible writing, I'm sorry. You could have had him do it to any demon, but the demon Primarch being made a little bitch like that's just cringeworthy. So now you have a taste of the overblown rules of said force, and the barest taste of cringeworthy background that accompanied it. But what made it so toxic? Easy. It arguably marked the beginning of the decline of all of Warhammer 40,000 as a game. Here was a force which could be made with just 14 models at 1,000 points. It was simple. It needed no bright spark to play it. It could do everything, and since it was just silver, it was quick and easy to paint, even for the talentless. This led to dozens of Grey Knight armies at events, armies of poorly built, poorly spray painted with paints from the hardware store, smashed together by people who didn't love the hobby, but rather just wanted to win games. It had the further effect of alienating everyone who didn't play the new armies. People playing Tau, Chaos Eldar, they all hated their games now because even taking their most powerful lists, they couldn't measure up to the weakest of the Grey Knights. You needed an exceptional player to overwhelm the most brain-dead, balding brony whose only remarks were quotes from Dawn of War games and talk about how cool the Grey Knights were. The hobby became objectively worse due to the existence of this book, and Games Workshop learned an awful lesson. That more than ever, rules sold models. And if you don't believe this, the Dreadnought was one of the best-selling model kits in their range in 2011. They took this philosophy to heart, and ever since, the new flavour of the month has almost always managed to have some surprisingly effective rule attached to it ever since. Purely coincidental, I'm sure. Lastly, just so you know how much this work aggravated the community, Matt Ward was actually bailed up and abused in a car park over words he wrote on paper. How much passion do you have to inspire in a fanbase for them to hunt you down in the car park? Consequently, after that incident, they started to pull authors' names from books so you can't track down the people who ruined the game. Not that I would ever go after Phil Kelly for what he did in 6th edition to Chaos Space Marines and the Eldar. Phil, if you're listening, it's all water under the bridge. Why don't you come over the edge here and just have a look? Lovely view, isn't it? Now, on that particularly divisive ending, that's all from me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. If you enjoyed this episode, please let me know your thoughts below. If you got to play against or played with Grey Knights in this edition, I want to know your thoughts too. How did you go? How were your games? Was it enjoyable? What did you think of the writing? I'm curious, because I have some pretty horrible memories from this time, and so do a lot of the people I've spoken to. And I thought this would be a fun new series. So let me know what you think. See you all on the next one.